Welcome to the Native History channel, the channel where we look at different topics related to Native American history. Today we'll be talking about Sitting Bull, one of the most important figures in Native American history. Sitting Bull, born in around 1831 and died in around 1890, was a Hunkpapa Lakota Sioux warrior and leader who played a significant role in the resistance of Native tribes against the encroachment of white settlers in the American West during the late 19th century. Sitting Bull was born into a prominent Lakota family in what is now South Dakota, and he was recognized as a gifted leader and warrior from a young age. He became a war chief of the Hunkpapa Band of the Lakota in the 1860s and played a key role in battles against rival tribes and against the U.S. Army. In 1876, Sitting Bull was one of the leaders of the resistance against the U.S. Army in the Battle of Little Bighorn, in which the Lakota and Cheyenne tribes decisively defeated a U.S. Army force led by George Custer. Following the battle, Sitting Bull became a symbol of Native American resistance and defiance against white settlers and the U.S. government. He was forced to flee to Canada for a time, but he eventually surrendered to U.S. authorities in 1881 and was held as a prisoner of war for several years. In the 1880s, Sitting Bull became involved in the Ghost Dance movement, which was a spiritual movement that sought to bring about the restoration of traditional Native American ways of life. The movement was viewed as a threat by the U.S. government, and Sitting Bull was killed by U.S. Army soldiers in 1890 during an attempt to arrest him for his involvement in the movement. Today, Sitting Bull is remembered as a symbol of Native American resistance, and as a heroic leader who fought to preserve the traditional ways of life of his people in the face of enormous challenges and opposition. His life and legacy continue to inspire and influence Native American activists today. But what exactly happened at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and what did Sitting Bull do during it? Also known as Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of Little Bighorn was a major battle between a combined force of Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes and the U.S. Army in Montana in 1876. Sitting Bull played a significant role in the battle as one of the leaders of the Native American forces. In June 1876, General George Custer and the 7th Cavalry set out to attack a large encampment of Native Americans in the Little Bighorn Valley. Custer was under the mistaken belief that the native forces were smaller and less well armed than they actually were. But his forces were quickly overwhelmed by the combined forces of the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. The native forces, under the leadership of Sitting Bull and other prominent chiefs, such as Crazy Horse and Gall, fought fiercely and effectively, using their superior knowledge of the terrain and their mobility to outmaneuver the U.S. Army. Custer and his troops were surrounded and ultimately wiped out in the battle, resulting in a decisive victory for the native forces. The battle became a symbol of native resistance and defiance against the U.S. government. Sitting Bull was not directly involved in the combat at Little Bighorn, as he was overseeing a separate group of native warriors at the time. But he played a key role in organizing and coordinating the native forces, and his leadership and strategic vision were critical to their success. The Battle of Little Bighorn is remembered as one of the most significant battles in the history of the American West, and Sitting Bull's role in the battle has cemented his place as a legendary figure in the history of native resistance. Let's learn a little bit more about the political organization of the Lakota. What is a band? The Lakota, also known as the Teton Sioux, were a nomadic native tribe who inhabited the Great Plains region of North America. They were organized into a complex social and political system based on a series of bands, each of which was led by a chief or a headman. A band was a group of Lakota people who were related by kinship or marriage, and who lived together in a particular area. Bands were typically led by a chief who was responsible for making decisions for the group, and who was respected for his wisdom, bravery, and leadership. The Lakota political system was highly decentralized, with each band maintaining a degree of autonomy and independence from the others. But bands were also connected to one another through a series of social and political relationships, including alliances and intermarriages. The Lakota also had a larger political organization known as the Tiospaye, which was a group of related bands who came together for mutual protection and support. The Tiospaye was led by a council of chiefs who made decisions for the group and resolved disputes between bands. So, overall, they were based on a complex system of kinship, alliance, and leadership, which allowed them to maintain its cultural traditions and way of life in the face of external pressures. The band was a key unit of this system, representing the basic building block of Lakota society and culture. So how did the Lakota Wars proceed in the 1860s? The Lakota Wars of the 1860s were a series of conflicts between the Lakota Sioux and the U.S. Army, as well as rival native tribes over control of the Great Plains region of North America. The wars were characterized by a series of battles and skirmishes and a complex web of alliances and rivalries among various tribes. One of the key factors driving the conflict was the westward expansion of white settlement and miners who were encroaching on Lakota lands and resources. The government had begun to implement a policy of forced assimilation of natives, which further exacerbated tensions between the Lakota and the U.S. Army. In 1862, a group of Sioux warriors attacked a U.S. Army outpost in Minnesota, leading to widespread conflict between the Sioux and the U.S. Army in the region. The conflict continued throughout the 1860s with a series of battles, including the Battle of the Rosebud and the Battle of Little Bighorn that we just talked about, in which the Lakota Sioux and their allies defeated George Custer. The Lakota Wars were also marked by complex alliances and rivalries among the various tribes, as they sought to protect their lands and resources from encroachment by white settlers and miners. The Lakota formed alliances with the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, while also engaging in conflicts with other tribes like the Crow and the Pawnee. Overall, the 1860s were a pivotal period in the history of Native resistance to the encroachment of white settlers and the U.S. government. The wars demonstrated the courage and resilience of the Lakota Sioux and other native tribes in the face of enormous challenges and adversity. Let's look a little more at the relationships that the Lakota had with other tribes. They had complex relationships with the other tribes in the Great Plains region. While they were often engaged with conflict with the rival tribes, they also formed alliances and partnerships with others for mutual protection and benefit. For instance, the Lakota formed a strong alliance with the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes in the mid-19th century, as they shared a common enemy in the U.S. Army. Together, these three tribes engaged in a series of battles and skirmishes, including the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The Crow tribe was a traditional rival of the Lakota, and the two tribes engaged in conflicts over resources and territory. However, during the 1860s, the Crow tribe briefly allied with the U.S. Army against the Lakota, leading to tensions between the two tribes for many, many years. The Pawnee tribe was another rival of the Lakota, and the two tribes engaged in conflicts over hunting grounds and other resources. But in the mid-19th century, the Pawnee tribe briefly allied with the U.S. Army against the Lakota and their allies, which further strained their relationship. Thus, the Lakota had a series of complex alliances, rivalries, and conflicts, reflecting the challenges and complexities of native life on the Great Plains. Despite their differences, many tribes recognized the importance of working together to protect their lands and resources from encroachment by white settlers and the U.S. government. Thank you for listening. If you like this video, please subscribe.